Welcome back to another episode of System of Systems, the audio misinformation arm of the Safety Propaganda Counterintelligence Network. These are your hosts, Mr. Adam Lehrer.
And Will Sampson.
And Will, you know how there's that saying, you should never meet your heroes?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that thrown around a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have to say that the people who say that are fucking idiots. Because when I was a kid, there was one band who perhaps more than any other introduced me to the world of rock and roll and fandom and all the possibilities that it entails. Fast forward some 27 years later, and I open up my email on a quiet Sunday morning, and the front man of that infamous rock band, the Smashing Pumpkins, sends me what was perhaps the most delightful and encouraging letter from someone I respect that I've ever received. And that man and artist, Mr. William Patrick Corgan, is here with us on the show tonight. Billy, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Adam.
So how was your holidays? How was the rest of the tour? How has life been going in the interim since we last spoke?
Life is good. I've settled into I find myself thinking, am I still living the middle class dream, like family, picket fence, I think it's hard to beat the middle class need for reassurance out of my system. But yeah. I have found happiness later in life by having a family, and I enjoy those trappings. So, but with it comes all the stress. There's as I read in your book, there's the stress of trying to score drugs, and then there's the stress of trying to deal with your kids at Christmas. One leads to a black hole, the other leads to just more stress. But I'm happy to deal with my children. So no, it's just I love Christmas. I'm a big Christmas fan. I collect vintage Christmas stuff, so our house is decorated like a museum, and but it's over now, and now it's like turn the page to the new year. So I'm very much on that now.
Yeah. And I mean, you've also been able to incorporate your kids into your life as a rock and roll musician in a rather endearing way. Of course, I'm referring to their appearance on stage at the Madison Square Garden show, which, of course, everybody in the crowd really loved and got a kick out of.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent on sort of assimilating my kids into my lifestyle in a way that makes them realize what is and isn't about it. They certainly like the sort of the buzz of the whole thing, but they think it's kind of strange. But I think my father was a musician, and I enjoyed being part of his world, and so I just kind of take the same approach.
Yeah. Do you think that they're already aware that that you're a rock star?
Yeah, but I don't think they have the understanding of the scale of it.
Right.
So everything for them is localized. Like we were playing a show in Chicago, and my son came out with somebody and sat in front of the barricade, and he had this really strange look on his face. And after the show, I asked him, "Oh, did you not enjoy the show?" And he said, "No, I enjoyed it." And I said, "Were you not proud of me up there?" And he said, "No, I'm proud of you up there." And I said, "Well, what was the weird face?" He said, I didn't like all those people staring at you."
Yeah, that's interesting. I've often thought about what it's like just to have the realization that your parents are like famous or like well known.
Well, I've dealt with the progeny of a lot of famous people through my life, and some I would call friends. And something about that process seems to mess them up. So I'm still trying to back engineer what it is about that process that messes them up, whether it's the shadow of whatever they grow up into, or a sense that maybe they don't have to work as hard as I did or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still navigating that. But part of it is to give them a tactile sense of what my job actually is. The rhythm of that life, whether it's a tour bus or a diner on the side of the road. I want to normalize it in a way that they understand that what's important about it is relationships and let's call it the family business. That the showbiz part of it is fine, but that's not what we're really focused on internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Also curious before I change the subject, your dad imparted a love of music onto you. My dad is for sure the person who got me into music, and like music especially, but also films and stuff like that. Are they interested in music or rock and roll in the way that you once were?
Yeah, although they have different responses to it. My son blew my mind the other night. We were listening to some show on satellite radio, and it was a version I'd never heard before, but it sounded like Paul McCartney re-recorded a Beatles song, but in the 80s. And I'm a pretty big Beatles fan, so I was sort of shocked. I was like, I wonder what this is, but it was obviously from the 80s. And I was playing a video game with my kid. My kid's only 7, my son. And he said, oh, I know this song, and he knew the name of the song. And then he said, but this is a different version. The tone and the texture of the song is different. And I was like he recognized that the production was different. That's pretty mind blowing for a 7-year-old. So
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
for sure.
yeah, there's a sort of chop there that the kids seem to have. But it's, look, the easy version is you project on them and you think, every little utterance is a sign of musical genius or something. I have seen enough evidence to suggest that they have innate ability in the arts. Their uncle on the other side is their granduncle on the other side is a world-class architect in Paris, and their grandfather on their mother's side is a world-class fashion designer. So I see flashes even of them with architecture and stuff like that. So, but again, it's easy to project. I'm more focused on sort of what they're interested in, and I will say they have an unquenchable curiosity about things. Like they love learning. Like my son gave me a whole speech the other day about how the ocean should be left alone and animals shouldn't be taken, or the sea life should not be taken out of the oceans and put in aquariums because it disturbs the ecosystem of the animals. And I started thinking, is he spouting some kind of woke talking point he got on some show? No, because there's a lot of that stuff that's programmed now, and kids they pick up on the programming.
Yeah, of course.
But he actually kind of spun it into this whole thing that was his own philosophy. Like he was personally bothered by the idea that sea life is sort of messed with. And I really asked him like a bunch of questions about it. He had really good answers.
That's amazing.
He had this whole kind of worldview that the ecosystem should not be bothered. And I gave him the counter narrative view, which is that one of the reasons that people believe in zoos and aquariums is it teaches people the sanctity of life, plant, animal life, whatever. And that creates a greater sense of respect properly presented. We've all been to the zoo where they have the mirror. I think it's the one in Central Park where you look at the mirror and said, "This is the most animal in the world." It's you. So it's cool. I don't know. So we'll see. But I'm definitely intrigued by my kids' journey so far.
Yeah. I do think 6-7 years old is like actually the exact same age, more or less, where I developed like a awareness of my own culture. I think it was like that was the year where I started being like asking my parents to buy me CDs, or I started watching music videos. The 1979 music video is actually like such an indelible image, like imprinted onto my head, because I remember like that song would come on MTV or VH1 or whatever, and like the da-na-na-na-na, like that amazing like texture to the song, and then the video had like all the really like misbehaved kids, and one of those kids, which is crazy to think now, I don't know if you realize this, Will, but one of the kids in the 1979 video is Giuseppe Andrews, who turned out to be like an amazing filmmaker and artist in his adult years. Did you know that, Billy?
Okay.
I did not know that, but I know that one of the kids, I think, went to jail for murder.
Oh shit.
I know
and here
that.
I was like, these kids are awesome, like watching the video. Maya Rudolph, the great comedian and actress, is actually in the 33 video. Whoa.
Oh.
You have
Paul
to
Thomas Anderson's wife.
Yes,
Yeah.
you have to look hard to see her, but she's actually in one of the scenes. And the only reason I know this is when I met Maya Rudolph, she goes, "You probably don't remember meeting me." And you kind of get that moment of like, you think you're being rude because you don't remember somebody. But she's like, "No, you met me when I was a kid, when I was a kid on your video set." One other thing, just because you brought up the 1979 video is, and this shows you how much the world has changed. There's a scene in there where one of the kids, I think it was the kid who ended up going to jail for something. I'm probably exaggerating what he went to jail for, but he runs down the aisle of a convenience store and knocks over a roll of toilet paper. MTV came back and told me, "You've got to take that scene out because
Really?
it promotes delinquency or violence or something." And
Wow.
and MTV said, "If you don't take that scene out, we won't play the video." And I said, "Okay, but that seems kind of ridiculous." "Well, our standards and practices, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. If I'm supposed to edit that scene out, what about the video?" And I name checked some video where somebody was brandishing a gun. And there was a video. I don't know if it was Biggie Smalls or something. And I said, "How does that work?" And they started doing the Jackie Gleason humming a humming a humming a humming a. And I said,
Yeah.
so you understand that if you make me edit this scene out, I'm going to blast you guys for promoting violence.
Yeah.
And they backed off.
Amazing.
And so I know I know I'm a rebel here, but I was able to keep the toilet paper knocking over scene in the video.
I mean, that is kind of an amazing story because when I look back at the 90s, music videos was like the thing, and a lot of them were edgy as shit back then.
Yeah.
Like that was kind of the whole vibe. Nine Inch Nails Closer video. I mean, obviously all the Marilyn Manson videos, all like the gun-toting, like scary Wu-Tang videos, like Mark Romanek, Fincher, like that was like music videos back then were amazing. Like the collision of image and sound pretty much shaped the aesthetic sensibilities of like pretty much everybody my age. And it's hard for me to imagine with like, you guys got a video of like Marilyn Manson walking around with like a dickless like alien body, and you're gonna be upset about toilet paper theft. The fuck?
Well, when you look at these weird moments in 20th century cultural history, there are those weird 1 or 2 year blips, and they only happen every 20 or so years, where the edginess, and I use that word loosely, the edginess of the art outpaces their ability to try and control it. In essence, it's good for business to be edgy, so they'll be as edgy as long as it's good for business, and then they'll withdraw when it stops being sort of financially expedient.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly how it works. They like encourage controversy up until the point the controversy actually does what it's supposed to, which is like enrage various institutions or
yeah. If you don't mind me riffing on the concept for a second, that's one of the weird things, and I talk a lot about. I'm obsessed with systems, and like Burroughs talked a lot about systems of control. I'm sort of just obsessed with systems. And one of the interesting things about being successful at the highest levels in art is you're fully aware of where the lines are, but nobody has to tell you. You know what I mean? So you're up there being edgy, but in the back of your mind, you're like, this isn't really that edgy. You know what I mean? So you're playing with like the edge of the edge.
right.
Manson is an example of somebody, like you said, like the dickless bodysuit. I was around for that period and actually kind of did some ghostwriting on that album, so I was pretty aware of that whole dynamic. And it's interesting because, what am I trying to say? It's like you see somebody push the Overton window on the edginess, like imagine, like I'm getting conversations on, you can't have the guy roll the toilet paper over in the convenience store, but in another quadrant of their business, they got people waving guns around. Then here comes Manson and Nine Inch Nails and being super dark, not necessarily for kids type of visual imagery, a lot of implied stuff, obviously. And then one day that all sort of just stops. Like it stops working as a business, or they go too far and they start reeling it back. Or, as is often the case, they start rewarding people who have the appearance of violence and the appearance of the edginess, but it's all sort of sanitized and watered down. And then they push the people who are over the line, whatever the line is now, they push them all out the door. I certainly felt a lot of that in the late 90s and early 2000s. They were sort of over that. It was, Viacom and all them, they were like, oh, we don't want to deal with this anymore. It's just, and you get into like a lot of CYA stuff where people start making mid-level lieutenant decisions to keep you out of the kingdom.
Yeah, I actually jotted down some notes about that because I'm so curious about your perspective on this, because it does seem like, and of course nobody really appreciated it or thought about it directly when it was going on, but the 90s was a very, like the early to mid 90s was a very specific pop cultural moment. Like you had, actually weird and strange and boundary pushing art in every discipline, whether it was like film like Tarantino or Harmony Korine, or literature. You had Bret Ellis, music, you had the Pumpkins, Nirvana, Wu-Tang, like all these things were commercially viable and at the center of the pop culture. So what was that? And then by the late 90s, it's like a formula. Like you have like the last gasp of MTV, which is like boy bands and new metal. And then they kind of pushed that out the door. Carson Daly disappeared into late night, and then it's like a reality TV network. But what was that like to achieve success during this moment when music wasn't just like big, but like music was fucking everything? Like it was the absolute center of the universe. And then to so precipitously watch that, watch like music disperse into, like, it's obviously still made, it's just not like the central force of popular culture anymore.
Well, I would say that let's talk about it maybe in terms of waves. The first wave is exhilarating. This, like, it's just super intoxicating time. So between say 90 and 95, it was very intoxicating because you're like, shit, we're running the world. You know what I mean? Like you literally are, you're running game. And you're getting away with murder by conventional standards. You've always got some guy from Brooklyn in your ear in the corner telling you it's not that dangerous, and you've got to watch the guy hanging from an upside down cross to really understand what edgy is. But I'm no apologist for mainstream culture. I've definitely been burned by it myself. But there is something about standing in the white hot arc light of the zeitgeist of a particular culture, being recognized by grandma and the kid at the mall, and then being in these board meetings, and it's again very intoxicating. You're fully aware that it's a rare moment in time if you have any intelligence at all. Wave two is, okay, now here comes the imitator class. The formula is laid out. You've broken the code. Now here come the B and C and D level talents who are just aping the sound of rage and aren't really, like, let's call it the chrysalis of, like, yeah, I'm sure there were 50 other Kurt Cobains, but Kurt Cobain, like Jimi Hendrix or whatever, like they embody something that's greater than themselves.
Yeah.
And it was obvious even at that time that Kurt in particular embodied that. I saw people react. I saw the before, during, and after and all that stuff, including after he died. And how people were sort of quick to turn him into a myth, saw off the edges. They've done it to Michael Jackson. So it's like, you watch that happen. And then wave three, you start to get this, like, it's kind of, let's call it like almost like a metal fatigue. The starship is still running 1,000 miles an hour. You're still in it. Every manager, all this money is being made, but you start to sense like something is shifting, but you're so in it, you can't really feel the shift, like where the shift is actually going. And then wave four is, oh, it's over. And then you see rats start to scramble off the ship. I mean, there are various conspiracy theories about the shift from in MTV culture from let's call it very edgy alternative music to suddenly promoting, really culturally unhealthy themes, where suddenly, the toilet paper was verboten, but the gun waving is okay. There's lots of interesting conspiracy theories about that, but let's say it's not even conspiracy theory. Just culture changes. People reach a sort of a fatigue point. But even when you're in it and it's ending, it's like it ends to what? Like, you're not going to jump off the ship because you're on the ship. Or if you got enough of an ego, you think, well, I made this ship, right?
Right.
Then you start getting into the rationalization of like, do I keep doing what I'm doing? Do I try to pivot to this kind of the new thing, whatever is the new thing? If you remember the late 90s and you brought it up, it was Lilith Fair. It was a gangster rap, or at least the early versions of it. It was new metal. You know what I mean? And I'll give you a quick example which illustrates this. When we started in early 90s, there were 7 alternative stations in America. I think by the nadir in the late 90s, there was like over 140 or 160 stations. So we literally together collectively built a business that did not exist.
Yeah.
You get to the end of the 90s, alternative radio splits into 2 camps, essentially. New metal and Lilith Fair. So suddenly the Smashing Pumpkins are too heavy for the Lilith Fair stations and not heavy enough for the new metal stations. So by the end of the 90s, we're asked out on a genre that we helped build.
Yeah.
And there's no sentimentality. The fact that you played this guy's kid's pool party and all that stuff, they just shrug. Like, you basically get that kind of cold wind we've seen in 1,000 Hollywood movies. Like, sorry, kid, it's over. Move on. Back to Starbucks. And it's it really is like that. Like, it's that cold. It's not like, gee, sorry, kid. It's like, sorry, it's over. The Greyhound bus is moving on, and we're all wearing, Fred Durst's red hat. Goodbye. Boom. And they are down the road. Goodbye. They don't have time to be sentimental. And even later, people would come back later and apologize to me. Hey, sorry, blah, blah, blah. I should have known better. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
There's nothing, I'm not trying to belabor the point, but there's nothing culturally deep about it. You're standing there thinking, hey, I was part of something very important. I inspired this. I was part of this. And they go, yeah, so what? Goodbye. Totally. You can literally hear the door like close. It's over.
Yeah.
And then you're into this whole other paradigm. And then you hit into like the music business starts to bottom out. In our particular case, the music business bottomed out early 2000s because of illegal piracy. The money goes out the door, and then you want to talk about no sentimentality. That's when you feel the real cold wind of the business.
Yeah, I remember when that was all happening with Napster, and people would like shit on Lars Ulrich so much for speaking out about it. And it's like, I remember even I was like 12, and I was like, but he's a professional musician, and if nobody buys music, isn't he supposed to be upset about it? Like, he was 100% right about where that was happening, and none of the labels wanted to listen.
Let me tell you a quick funny story, and this is the right context for it. So I knew the Napster guys from the beginning, like before they were household names. I knew them personally. And when they started taking a bunch of shit and Congress started to try to move against them, they started scrambling to figure out how to hold their spot. Yeah. This is all before the rise of Facebook and everything, right? So they looked like they were about to get crushed. So they called me. This is circa 99. This is post Lars testifying in front of Congress and all that. I put my finger in the wind, and I thought the future was with the Napsters of the world. So I basically lined up on their side of the street, partially because I believed it, and that basically free open source music was where it was going to go anyway.
Yeah.
And secondarily, I knew them personally. So imagine they call me on the phone, and they're like, hey, will you help us? Will you help us kind of go out and fight this public fight? And I'm like, sure, And they started asking me to do all this stuff for them, and I kind of go, and somehow somebody had told me behind the scenes that they were giving out, in exchange for favors, they were giving out stock to Napster stock because they'd gone public or something like that. And I said, do I get anything for doing this? And they're like, well, no. I said, so wait, you're stealing my music. I'm okay with it. I'm willing to go publicly endorse you. I'm already on the record for public endorsement. You want me to be one of the people you roll out, but you won't give me anything for basically rolling my own head. And they were like, no.
Wow.
What the fuck?
I know.
That's
And,
insane.
And yeah, Sean Parker he's one of the
Yeah, I
guys who
still know
ended up
Sean.
starting.
Yeah, I mean, I know both of them, Parker and Fanning. I've literally known them since they were 19 years old, and they were, just these kids. And I'm cool. It's not. I've seen them all since, and it's all good. And life went on. Parker invested in Facebook and made his gazillions and all that, so they're all good. I think Fanning was big in early Uber, so they've all gotten paid. So they did okay. Like they landed on their feet, but at that point they were in a very insecure position. But so was the recording business.
Yeah.
Yes, it's what I'm trying to say is being. I guess if I could put these two disparate thoughts together. Everybody likes being a rebel until they can't pay their bills.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like everybody likes to talk shit until they can't pay their bills.
Right.
So even like the Reaper comes for Napster, they start looking around for who they're going to need. Suddenly somebody like me who's suddenly not valuable is valuable again. And like they were willing to roll me out to, like, I don't know, run game for them.
Yeah.
It's I guess what I'm trying to say is, and it's no defense because I don't need to defend it. Existing at the highest levels of art in mainstream culture, and that's the way to define it. You know what I mean? Everybody can jerk off some indie band from Brooklyn all they want. Being in the maelstrom, shaking Sumner Redstone's hand in the MTV conga line, you realize people they're playing a game that's so high above your head. I mean, you're just chattel in that thing. Yeah. So if you get anything done, whether you're the Byrds or Nirvana, or if you get anything done, and I've done it, you realize how fucking impossible it is.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about this kind of thing a lot recently, because last year I actually saw you guys, saw the Pumpkins. I even went to this like sold out Chili Peppers show, like 54,000 people at Phillies Stadium. And I have like a lot of friends who are on like the sub underground of music making, and they have this like value system that I don't really share, because personally I would much rather be like Norman Mailer than be some like forgotten underground writer touting underground values. I want people to read my work, and I want it to get beyond my crew or whatever. But I was like, okay, so right after I saw you guys, and you have this like big, spectacular, proper rock and roll show that my wife and I just had like a great time at. And then the next weekend I go to Nashville because my pals are putting on this like noise music festival. And I couldn't help, like, I'm like, yeah, I respect what you guys are doing, but like, there's just nothing that fucking compares to like a rock show with scale, and I think that's kind of something that we've lost, is the ability to appreciate the power of being able to produce something that's beloved by a lot of fucking people, that's still artistically challenging and relevant. In this day and era, there's barely anyone. There's like Kanye West, and I would struggle to name 2 or 3 more. But like when you were at the apex, that was like a thing that was going on. And it's something that I mourn, like being able to like have a band come to town like the Smashing Pumpkins and all of your friends want to go. That's just like totally lost.
Well, there's so many threads of thought there. One is most of the systems that exist today are not really willing to be in the dangerous business anymore. They've got it so mechanized that you can see that almost nothing in mainstream culture is truly edgy anymore. Once rap effectively stole the sway and swagger of rock, and rock allowed itself to be coddled by, let's call it the Pitchfork system of if we don't knight you, you don't exist, which I would argue is very much a upper middle class, essentially white value system. That's most of the writers that I've encountered, right? Particularly male. It's like this weird, like it's college, but it's like applied to indie music, right?
Yeah.
Better you're in your basement than like selling out Madison Square Garden, right? So those guys will look down their nose at what we've done. But I've made the argument, and I say this with a smile because I know that, you know, some of your audience is very much on the avant-garde side of the street. We're one of the most dangerous bands to ever actually achieve mainstream success. There is a value in
Absolutely.
that. I'm not saying it's the entire value. You know what I mean? I believe in the entire ecosystem. You know, like when I was a kid, I was reading Burroughs and Nietzsche, and I was reading, you know, I don't know, like, I don't know, Andy Hardy books. I don't remember what the fuck, teen books. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it's okay. Like, it's okay. That's one of the things I liked about your book Communions. It's like I felt there was a celebration of both, let's call it high and low culture, or
Oh, absolutely.
avant-garde culture and let's call it shitty culture, whatever.
Yeah.
Threading the needle on that, I can tell you straight up, no blarney, is an impossible task, which is why anybody who ever does it, you know, for any length of time, The Cure, Depeche Mode, you know, it's usually short-lived because it's an impossible tightrope act, you know, because whether it's the erosion of imitation, which is inevitable, whether it's your own hubris, which is inevitable because you look around, you go, well, ain't any of the motherfuckers like us up here. But it's all illusory because you're still operating at the grace of somebody with the bigger checkbook.
Yeah.
And once you kind of realize that, then I don't want to say become aware of your own mortality, but you realize you're really playing with borrowed time. So I'm at least proud at the times that we've been at the top of culture, recently again, and then in those periods of the 90s, you know, that we did as much disruptive stuff as we could without blowing up our spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let me tell you, the things that I did that really pushed people's buttons, and it wouldn't be anything that anybody from the avant-garde side of the equation would consider edgy, but they were certainly edgy within the confines that I was operating in. I paid for those things between 2001 and 15 in ways that you can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Because they don't want fucking outliers. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
They were willing to tolerate my excesses or my weirdnesses when I was making them a lot of money. The minute you stop making that tick below that kind of money, you're dead.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about no sentimental stuff. I mean, I would literally meet executives who would be like, "You're my favorite band. I saw you in name the year, greatest concert I've ever seen." And then in the same breath, they would tell me why they would never sign my band.
Wow.
And I'll quantify some of the responses I've gotten through the years. You're too smart. You know too much. You know how the business works. You're not malleable. I know I can't manipulate you, so you're too much of a fucking headache. I'd rather have somebody in here who I can just puppet. Straight up. And I'm not talking about one conversation. I'm talking about dozens of conversations through the years.
Yeah.
So imagine having somebody, again, within the context of what I'm talking about, which is mainstream work, somebody who recognizes your value, somebody who recognizes your import, definitely celebrates what you've accomplished, and then tells you you just don't fit in because you're just a pain in the ass. Not because I'm difficult, but because systemically you're too much of a pain in the ass.
Right. That's fascinating. I mean, I just that's kind of seems to be what Kanye West is going through now. Like, he finally realized that when he was 25 and signed a deal, he was seen as like a puppet that they could exploit. And I think the stress of that realization has made him combust to a degree. But yeah, you often like envision that a lot of these like shady, like a lot of the bands that gets like there's so much shit that's like my wife is always listening to these songs and I'm like, what is this? And she's like, it's this artist. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like, how many? It's like they sign everyone to these small deals that last for like a year. No one's actually seeming to try and build an act. And not to gas you up too much, but after I did your show, God, so many of my friends came up to me and they were like, what? Like Billy Corgan, like, cause you know, everyone, especially for guys like Will and I's age, like,
yeah,
that was the fucking band, you know, like it was the beginning of like all of our taste forming. Like, it was just such an undeniable sound that like pierced us. So regardless of all these shenanigans, the impact, it's a lasting one regardless.
Yeah, well, at some point I had to understand the difference between like neutering down what we'd accomplished to continue to survive, going back to ground and rebuilding, understanding that I could never go back to the counterculture because I'd already told that culture I didn't need them and they were fine to let me know, right? And so it's like you're like a man without country, right? You can't go back to alternative land because you're too big or too weird, and you can't go back to mainstream culture because they're just going to say you're too much of a hassle. So what I had to do was essentially recognize that the only option left, and we would call it, we give it different kind of names, would be like, let's call it the Pink Floyd model or the Grateful Dead model. It's like, well, how are those bands able to achieve sustain without the mainstream frame's approval? Well, they had to build their own culture, and they had to achieve a level of quality and consistency that sort of rallies multi-generationally into something that looks like it has some legs, to use the industry term. And we've achieved that now. Like we're releasing this 33 song concept record.
Yeah.
Everybody on the business side told me it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Why at 55 would you release a 33 song concept record? And I would point out, well, by the way, I released a 28 song concept record in 1995 that went on to be one of the biggest selling albums of all time and completely changed my life forever. And I'm still playing those songs every night. Yeah, but that was different. It was a different time. Don't release a 33 song concept record. Well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a podcast around it. Well, that's stupid. Nobody's going to listen. So now, because I've tripled down on my culture, which is important, and it's in some of our private conversations, I've encouraged you to do the same. Like, build your own world, live it however you want to live it, and then sort of be okay with that. Like, let's call it the commercial aspect of it. It doesn't mean you have to be commercial. I mean, I have a hit song right now, which is great, but my whole business model was not predicated on having a hit song. My business model was predicated on, this is my band, which is a brand. This is what we do. We make music. Here's what we're good at. And we're just going to double and triple down on that. And even if it means making a triple album. And everybody that I was in business with then told me it was a bad idea. And since that we released that record, all our numbers have gone through the roof. All the demos, as far as young people listening, is gone. Like it's success on every quantifiable level. And I had literally everybody tell me, bad idea, bad idea, bad idea. Think about that. Just I'm not asking anybody to invest in what I'm doing personally if you're not interested, but just conceptually. I'm 55 years old. I got 2 small kids. I've been in the game for 35 years plus. My father was a musician, totally had fails. He was super bitter. I consider myself an artist at heart, even if I'm a commercial artist. Okay, so I'm going to do what I want to do, which is I'm going to make music. I got people trying to talk me out of making music.
I know, it's crazy.
To do what? To burnish the brand in some other way, which has to do with sentimentality. In essence, don't give them any bad news. Otherwise, they might not want to buy a ticket. Like that kind of thinking, very, very restrained. And what I've said in a million boardrooms is, you're literally telling an animal that made it up all the way through the gauntlet of this insanity of fame and boardrooms to not do what got me there in the first place, get in line like everybody else, and be the guy that I hated growing up. The compromised man, like the man who just waits at the post office and won't say anything while the person behind the desk treats them rudely or whatever. Yeah. And that's all I'm trying to say is, and again, that's no defense. It's just, you find yourself in a spot and you can be a baby about it. You can sit there and cry and say, you should treat me a certain way, or you could just go back and just do the work. And if you believe in it, I think you'll find other people in this new system that's emerging. I know, we've talked a little bit about being, you independently publishing your books with your, I don't know the name of the group off the top of my head. Like that makes sense to me. It's like, don't wait around for somebody to say, hey, Adam, you're a good writer. Just put out your own work. And in our case, creating some affinity, which we may or may not have, I connected with what you wrote. For all I know, you're like the most celebrated young author in the world. I had no fucking clue. I just reached out to you because I wanted to let you know I was enjoying what you were doing. That's the new world that anybody listening, we can create that world. We don't need that other world if we really don't want it.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, there is something like, triggering to me about the idea. I mean, you've sold 30 million fucking albums. You would think that like earns like a lifetime goodwill card or something.
No, I'm going to be glib about it, but it's just for the sake of making the joke. It's never enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about somebody completely different for a second. Buster Keaton was arguably the more talented guy against Chaplin.
Yeah.
Chaplin was the far bigger star. Keaton was a pioneering director and a star in his own right. By the early to mid 30s, he's basically out of a gig. He can't. His last big avant-garde film that he made, whatever, I can't, General or one of those movies, was a flop. They didn't let him direct ever again. And by the 40s and 50s, he's just like a bit actor in pictures. This is one of the greatest comedians that's ever been produced in America, a complete American original. And by the 50s, he's just like, watch Sunset Boulevard. He's just like, he's a member of the cast. He's literally paying like a meta version of his own avatar in Sunset Boulevard as the comedian sitting around playing cards.
Right. Yeah,
like,
that's
I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that's the world you and I grew up in. You could take a genius like Buster Keaton and say, you just don't work in our system anymore. You want a job, go over, stand in line for a while. Maybe we'll give you a couple crumbs. Or we're going to do the silent film retrospective, so we'll drag Buster Keaton out so we can talk about the old days. I won't bore you to tears, but I still, in this media frame that we all live in, I'll get a request and it'd be like somebody wants to interview me about something, and of course I want to promote my new album. What do they want to talk about? An album for 30 years ago, because in their demo, that's what works, right? They're more than fine to pimp me out and talk about this and talk about that, as long as I color between those lines. Like, in essence, and I got people telling me I should be grateful. Like, it's good they want to talk about your album for 30 years. I don't give a fuck. And I mean that humbly. I don't give a fuck. Like, it's not really who I am. And I keep telling people over and over, it's not who I am. They cannot understand in this mainframe of media business, and I'm talking about movies, all of it, because I've been in every sphere, including Broadway. They cannot understand somebody who's not a sociopath. You understand?
Right.
They built a business for sociopaths to do what sociopaths do, so they can exploit them at the highest level.
Exactly. No, that's absolutely true. And since you mentioned Buster Keaton, I wanted to just briefly interlude this writer I know. He's very talented. He's from London, named Charlie Fox. He kind of writes about like horror and comedy in this very like debonair twee almost, but like dark twee kind of way. He wrote a fantastic biographical piece about Buster Keaton's childhood that I am going to remember to send you, because I think you would like it.
I know he was on stage when he was a kid, and his father used to throw him around the stage. That was
there's a lot of that. Yeah, like stage dad to the max, sort of like masculine Britney Spears mom kind of vibe. But yeah, let's talk about the new album, the rock opera, a little bit more, because I was curious. The first act is now out, which you premiered track by track on a podcast, which you were generous enough to have me on. But I was curious, did you have the concept for the album prior to writing this like colossal amount of tracks, or did you like have the songs and you started to see like an interconnection between them?
About 4 or 5 years ago, I came up with this idea of doing a third installment. We did Melancholy was concept 1. Machine in 2000 was concept 2. So I was like, it'd be interesting to pick this character back up 20 years later, kind of like a sequel, but like kind of out of time sequence in a way. In the setup, this artist has been exiled into space. That's the start of the whole journey. So I kind of wrote the whole story out the way I saw it, and then I wrote a bunch of music, and then I lined up thematically the music that I resonated with each theme, and then wrote the lyrics in conjunction with developing the story. Like, in essence, I had the plot, but then I developed the sort of nuances and put in the Hollywood stuff of the, you think it's going this way and it goes the other way, that type of stuff. Because at some point I'd like to stage it, even if it's theatrical with animation or it's probably too much for a movie, but it was certainly an interesting exercise. It got my blood up to at least give a shit, which is at this point, that's really, you have to find things that animate you.
Did you because I listening to the tracks, and this might just be my false reading of it, but it sounds like because you're one of my favorite guitar players ever, but I feel like the guitar on the album is really loud again. Did you have like a sort of was that like deliberate, or did you get find new passion with guitar playing, or has that passion always been there and it just worked for the record?
Two things. One, the company that I work with to make instruments, which is called Reverend, it's an independent guitar company. They had approached me. We had made a guitar a few years ago that won awards and was successful. And they were like, "Do you want to develop a different guitar?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to develop a guitar that more apes my 90s guitar sound, because when I use the one that we made already on stage, it doesn't quite get the roar that I want." So they made me this great guitar, which is out now, and it's been quite successful. So I found myself playing this guitar, which was aping my old sound, but now I'm playing it in a modern context. So it sort of kind of brought back some of the feels. And then as synchronicity goes in life, I'm making an album which has a built-in looking backwards component. So because in the conceptual frame, I was comfortable with revisiting old thematics, I found myself playing guitar a certain way and thinking a certain way. Even though on one level I've moved on, it allowed me a sort of conceptual frame to kind of go back and pick those things back up without feeling sort of compromised, like, oh, you're going backwards because that's what people want. It allowed me to embrace the sentimentality without feeling like I was being sentimental, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One more thing on that. Do you find all right, because like I've always loved the later records, like I mean, like Adore, Machina. I feel like those records aren't appreciated enough by the masses. Like I still re-listen to them all the time. It does feel like this record is at least like bigger in the scale of the response that it's getting. Do you feel like there has been maybe like another shift in the culture that we haven't really defined yet, that has people hungering for not a resuscitation of the past, but like that perhaps the onslaught of psychological warfare and commandeering, etc., over the last few years has created, Will, do you know what I'm talking about? Like it's like a thirst for, what am I saying? A thirst for authenticity.
Okay, that's where you're going with that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Without getting too into the weeds on what this, I talked to this astrologer once years ago, and this astrologer said that it was really weird, and I'm going to simplify it because it gets too personal. But essentially, the astrologer said sometime in the near future, and it was like 5 to 7 years, which is a lifetime in my brain. But in 5 to 7 years, you'll find yourself back at the epicenter of culture. And where I was standing at that time, it seemed impossible to me because I couldn't have been more outside of culture. You know what I mean? Like I was not being name checked. I wasn't, I mean, even like, I remember a magazine did like the top 150 alternative albums of all time. Melancholy wasn't even on the list. Like we were being kind of culturally edged out of narratives. You know what I mean? You want to talk about Burroughs and doublespeak and all that. Like you start to see where people are picking winners or losers historically, where you have agency and they're literally saying, oh, we're just not going to recognize that. We're going to kind of shove you out of the picture.
Yeah.
There's a book called The History of MTV. The Pumpkins aren't even mentioned in the book.
What?
Yeah.
Fuck
So
these people.
Saying is, so where I was standing in that particular moment, I was like, I couldn't be more outside culture. I mean, you know what I mean? And it's like I said before, not to repeat myself, I couldn't go back to alternative land. And I was basically ass out on mainstream land. So I'm kind of like, my choices are to be, you know, this kind of mawkish shadow of who I was, and I'm not down with that cause. So when this astrologer told me that, I thought, well, this is fucking impossible. There's no way. So when I asked for clarification on, let's call it the why part of the question, the astrologer said, because culture has become so vapid that when it shifts back looking for authenticity, they will look for people who have actually stood in the trench of authenticity, and they will identify you as one of those people. And again, when this person told me that, I thought, this is impossible. So your question is literally that heartbeat. It's like, and I see it from young people more so particularly. Of course, people over 40 have their own sentimental version. Like, gee, I wish it, I recognize that this had more integrity than I recognized at the time. Like an album like Adora Machina. I see that you put more of yourself into it than I thought at the time. At the time, I thought you were just being a fucking weirdo or something. Like, you get that. But there's something really interesting when you talk to a young person who's 22, and they're much more attracted to the later 90s work or some of the early 2000s work. And you kind of say to them, well, what is it about it? And they're like, there's just a freedom there, or a, you know, in my mind, it resonates in the same way like I love White Light, White Heat by the Velvet Underground.
Yeah,
it's like, it's completely the wrong fucking album. But it's so brilliant in being the wrong album. It's maybe the greatest thing they ever did, you know?
Oh, it's amazing.
For sure. 100%.
Yeah, it's got that weird, like, what the fuck, but this is awesome, right? So I get that from young people, and they're telling me, you got to remember, and again, I'm speaking like if people don't know what I've done. When you get rejected by mainstream culture, which is the other end of this particular spoon we're talking about, it's a cold, cold wind, right? I mean, it's like, it's not just like some people, you know, rejecting you. It's millions and millions of people are telling you you're wrong. Like, get the fuck out, right? So you feel that. You notice that, right? So when you go fast forward 20 something years and you're in an airport and you have a 22-year-old who doesn't look like somebody you would recognize culturally, you know, they're not wearing the Cure t-shirt is what I'm trying to say. They look more like they would be a Machine Gun Kelly fan than a Pumpkins fan. And they're pulling you aside and they want to talk about something of yours that they consider valuable that you were told at the time had no cultural value. That's a wild experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing I can reach for is those filmmakers and those authors where I love the stuff that people don't love just as much, because to me, I recognize that their voice is in all of it, not just the parts that are shiny and culturally approved, you know, which is why I always go out of my way. If I like an author or a movie, a filmmaker, I'll try to watch all those movies that everyone tells me not to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a good example that comes to my mind is Godard is like mostly revered for his like commie you know, deconstructionist stuff, new wave stuff in the 60s, but I've always actually preferred the really smutty and like old man grandpa horny movies he made in the 80s, like Hail Mary, because it's like a totally, but it's still Godard, you know, it's still, the genius is there. It's just like you could see he was embracing a different side of his vision. And that's how I always kind of understood like Adore and Machina and the albums that came after. They don't feel like diversions or like you disregarding the history of the band. I just am hearing like you know, if you say Siamese Dream or Melancholy or Gish, they have like this amplified, like you could really hear your love of rock and roll. There's a lot of rocking out on those records, whereas like something like Adore has an amplifying of your interest in things like the aforementioned
Depeche
Cure, Depeche Mode. Yeah. It's still like the same artist. And if you are interested in someone's work, then people need to like get out of their own fucking heads and embrace the artist's mind in its totality or something like that.
Can I give you a different riff on that? Because I think this might be helpful.
Yeah.
Because I this came up once in an interview, and the interviewer was somewhat, they weren't being hostile, but they were definitely being probative. So let's set up the general premise. Hey, and even Bob Dylan talks about this in his one book that was put out. Hey, you artist, why can't you do the thing that I like that you used to do? Right? So in my case, it'll be Siamese Dream or something, right? Or if Bob Dylan talks about, hey, why can't you be Mr. Tambourine Man anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I think it occurred to me when you were talking about Godard, the artist that has zeitgeist moments, experiences the zeitgeist moment, which is honestly a very rare experience. You know what I mean? It's a once in a lifetime type of thing, if you're lucky, and if you're really lucky, twice. Okay, so there's 8 billion people on the planet. Not many people have had the zeitgeist experience, so we start there. Well, once that effect kind of falls off, you're not in the white glare anymore. Well, that influences your work, whether people want to believe it or not, right? Even if you tell yourself it doesn't influence you, it influences you. So if you want evidence of the gravity that's hard to see, it's oftentimes the work that happens after those things that's imbued with a different sensibility because the artist has been through a transformational experience.
Yeah.
And when I said to the guy who was being probative about why can't you make Siamese Dream 3 or whatever, I said, listen, people like you, and I'm generalizing, people like you have been telling me that what I've been doing for the last 15 years is total shit. Well, that influences me, you understand? So you just can't go, hey, I like the t-shirt you wore in 93. Can you just put that t-shirt back on and I'll love you again? First of all, I don't believe that you would. Second, I've experienced what not love feels like, particularly from people like you. You're basically asking to re-imbue into a system that's already told me my value is strictly whether or not you approve, not whether I believe and I put my ass into something and lived and died with it. Right? But whether or not you give it the little thumbs up and I make your little best, 10 best sad albums of all time list. So in essence, once you've been through the zeitgeist and you break away from those systems, I can empathize with why a Fellini or a Godard or an Oscar Wilde kind of goes off a different type of deep end. Because you're dealing with a different scarcity principle. It's not the scarcity principle of like, I'm poor and I can't feed myself. It's the scarcity of like, you cared, like you didn't care, then you really cared. Now you really, really don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very
way I'm framing it.
Yeah, that's a very kind of like almost like Warholian sentiment in a way. The way that we are.
Can I interrupt you? I was not a big Warhol fan, and I didn't appreciate what Warhol was really after until I went through those experiences. And now I totally get why Warhol did what he did.
Absolutely. Yeah,
basically,
that's like,
this is my own French. Once you figure out it's all full of shit, you can never not remember that it's all full of shit.
Yeah. Yeah,
like look what fame did to Judy Garland. Like, you can never again believe in the dream.
You can't go
because
back.
The dream not only crushes you, it's happy to watch you die.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had fans, I kid you not, in the early kind of when internet culture really started to kind of get, negative early 2000s, I had literally saw fans wishing I was dead.
Jesus.
And you know why they wanted to wish me dead? They wished me dead because the current Billy Corgan circa 2003 was destroying their memory or their appreciation of my former work. And it would have been better off if I was dead and not remind them that I'd gone on to something else. I kid you not. That is not an exaggeration.
Yeah. I've even
that's fucking crazy if you really think about it.
Oh no,
Yeah.
it's crazy and it's evil. I've even like riffed on this kind of concept in like a mini essay that I wrote about Kurt once. Just because like I think there's a lot of that with Kurt too, where like a lot of people as tragic as his death was, I think there's also this like bizarre relief around his young death because people worry that their favorite rock star is not going to be like frozen in time in that way.
Did you release that piece?
It's like buried in this book, and I take on this very like sort of confrontational, like semi-evil tone, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah, because I read it. I read a similar thing once where a guy who was a huge Jimi Hendrix fan started off rhapsodizing about, it's a shame he died at 27 because this is the music we lost. So you kind of start reading it like it's your typical kind of Hosanna piece. And then the guy goes, well, but what if? And then the rest of the article was, what if he got in a bad prog rock jazz, like he started hinting at, and by 74 it was bad synthesizer music, and he started balding, and he turned into like, Zap at his worst or something.
Right.
Like they did the negative fantasy version, and it was very eye-opening, because that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I say this with total respect, because I think Kurt was a fucking genius. Like, that's no hesitation in that. I mean, I saw it, I witnessed it, I was around it, I experienced it. Brilliant mind, and truly a raconteur on the highest level. But one time a guy in an interview was comparing me. He wanted me to do this weird thing of like comparing myself to Kurt. And I was supposed, again, where the lines are in the coloring book, right? The guy, basically the way the whole thing was being framed was, it was my opportunity to praise Kurt and sublimate myself. And I wouldn't do it. So then the writer started pushing back, right? And the writer said, well, what's the difference between you and Kurt? He wanted me to, like, he took the bait of what I was setting up. And I said, well, I'm alive.
Right.
I'm here to be criticized. I'm here to age. I'm here to do other things, good and bad.
Yeah.
His is a closed system. Sadly, it shouldn't be, but it is. So you're always going to remember him in the stripy shirt, holding a cigarette, right? Me, you got to deal with like grumpy 55-year-old me. You know what I mean? But what I went on to illustrate, and I hope this translates in the way I'm saying it, is we live in such a sick system that the guy wanted me to celebrate a dead 27-year-old artist who was a genius above myself at 55, alive and still working. And I said,
Yeah.
I will not subscribe to that value system. You understand? I'm not going to play to your version of heroism or something. Like, it doesn't work like that for me. Like, they once asked Charles Barkley if Michael Jordan was a better basketball player. He said, if I thought Michael Jordan was better, I wouldn't be in the NBA.
I love that.
There comes a point where they want you to kind of get in line the way they want to line it up. And I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. There's like, there's a lot of fetish. And this is like something else I wanted to ask, and it kind of loops in. There's like a fear of self-belief, or like people think it's like corny to believe in what you're doing. And I experienced this 100%. Like when, rewind my life 4 years ago, and I'm working a shitty job, and I basically failed as a visual artist. And I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to like work a shitty job. And that's basically when I started writing a lot, just like on break and at night. And then I had that moment where nobody else was there to tell me. This was like totally a private pursuit until it wasn't. And I had that moment of like, actually, I think some of this shit is really fucking good. I'm sure you've had these moments in your life. I'm sure, Will, you might have even had them at some point already.
Constantly.
Yeah. But like, do you remember, like, not to rewind all the way back, but do you remember when you realized that, holy shit, like I've created a sound that I think is going to have like an impact?
Yes and no. The unfortunate aspect was my father being a musician. I really looked to my father for sort of approval or credit. Yeah. He was very withholding on that regard. So it was much easier for me to couch my accomplishment or ability within the realm of survival. So in that, I was no different than a prostitute turning a trick. The only difference with me that sort of shocks me in review is I had enough integrity to not completely sell myself out. So I did this weird thing, like, I'll whore myself out in these 7 ways, but I will not do it on the artistic side, which sounds really counterintuitive. But I was able to kind of find a balance. Like, I'll keep my kind of internal child self intact, while the other me kind of goes out and navigates this world and creates a successful rock band. And I was able to do that. Albums Like Adore was when I started to pay the piper on that, because I couldn't sustain it anymore. You know what I mean? Because now I'm in a double bind. I'm dealing with the devil's agents, and I'm dealing with my own devilment internally by what I'd compromised internally to be able to sustain. So I had this incredible run of 7 years and all these hits, but on some level I felt fraudulent, not because I was making fraudulent music, but I was positioning myself as somebody that I really wasn't, predicated on my need to survive, which is a street hustler's kind of way of saying, it's okay if I do these drugs because I'm going to make it to another day. Well, eventually the drugs run out, the game runs out, the money runs out. In my case, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was going to kill myself. And I started to pay that bill circa 97 when my mother died. And then all these kind of chickens came home to roost, to use the old saying. So it wasn't until years and years later that I actually started to assess my own kind of ability. I would say, because it's too boring to kind of take you all through it, but it's weird because I'm basically a Buddhist at heart, right? So I believe in the idea that you should be able to understand what you're good at, but not feel more enlightened than anybody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Basically, your path is a collective consciousness path or something like that. So it's weird because I've never felt more sure of myself as an artist, and I've never felt less ego-y than I feel now, because I don't feel any need to puff myself up. I mean, if anybody's listening remembers what I've said in the last hour, I mean, I'm not beating my chest. You know what I mean? I'm a very flawed, complicated person. I feel really, really good at what I do, and I feel like I'm a pretty, inaccurate human being. And I've got to figure out those two pieces before I go to my maker. So I'm very comfortable talking about what I'm good at, but I no longer need to couch it in messianic terms. I don't think that's really that valuable. I guess the best way I would explain it is understanding the calculus of the public. The public that feeds in that part of your brain that wants to feel special is exactly what imprisons you. So if you can break that and understand why most messiahs don't get too ego-y, that becomes the calculus by which you can truly free yourself and speak with authenticity. And that's what I love about what you're doing as a writer. I feel like you're speaking with a rare authenticity in a century where authenticity is like the last of people's concerns.
Yeah, it's almost like I do like I don't say anything that I don't believe entirely, but I do use almost like a tone that's like an exaggerated version of myself, like a performer or whatever, because I feel like that gives me some distance between the work that's out there and then like my actual private life with my wife or whatever. And I like, because I feel like it's good to give yourself to people, but to also still protect the self from the media in a weird way. I haven't quite like rectified all this shit in my head, but did you ever feel like there was a distance between Billy the Corgan the performer and then like yourself, William Patrick Corgan?
Well, I've talked a lot, and I talk a lot on my podcast about creating a persona and various personas through the years to ameliorate the tension. What's really weird is, as I've talked about my use of characters and personas, avatars is the way I would say it, through the years, starting with Zero in 94, 95, what's really weird is I've actually kind of come out publicly, said, look, a lot of it was a ruse. The character you think I am isn't actually my real personality at all. It was all performative. People kind of make this little weird, funny upside down face, and they want me to go back to being the firebrand or something. Like they want me to be a cartoon version of myself, which is really weird, because I didn't do it. I did it for survival, and I did it to, again, like to use your languaging, to ameliorate the tension between private and public life. It was my way of navigating it as somebody who came from a lot of abuse. So I reach a point where like, okay, I don't need to do that anymore. I'm just going to kind of be myself. And I'm more than happy to talk about, like when I put on the cloak, I'm Batman, and then I take it off, and then I'm just some boring schlub from the suburbs. I'm like, I'm cool with that. Like, I don't need to perform for you. People are disappointed. They want me to be performative, which is really, really weird to me, because I no longer need it. And they want it from me in a way that's almost kind of, I wouldn't say it's gross, but it feels a bit icky, right? because as far as I'm concerned, I'm healthy-ish. Like, you know what I mean? I'm actually intact. I'm speaking with authenticity. I'm willing to be transparent. I don't think I'm a perfect human being. I don't need to play the Messiah. I'm not even sure rock and roll is capable of changing the world anymore. I'm just really good at it. I don't need to believe in the messianic message to get my energy up to write another rock song or something. Like I could do it all, right? I can make a sad movie, and I can make a comic book movie or whatever. It's all good. Like I'm just happy, right? It's all good. And you realize the stickiness has a lot to do with like why people are attracted to you in the first place, which is why I say the business rewards sociopaths, because the sociopath puts their finger up in the wind and goes, "Oh, you want me to be the guy in the blue jeans with the red bandana in my back pocket talking about how much I love America? Oh, cool. I'll play that guy all fucking day, especially if you put me in a stadium."
Yeah.
One of the things I really respected, if anybody's ever seen Bruce Springsteen's his Broadway thing that he did and that was filmed, he literally says in the first 5 minutes of the performance, it might be 10, he basically says Bruce Springsteen is a complete construction.
Right.
It's amazing. Have you ever seen the beginning of that?
No, but I remember reading something about that. But I know that, and there's also been like an antagonism between like the vast majority of the idea of like Bruce Springsteen's fan base, which is like blue collar, we love America, which is great. And then like Bruce Springsteen's, insanely wealthy lifestyle. But I should check that out.
He just sold his catalog for $500 million. God bless. But what I'm saying is, where I respected, because I always felt, I've met him a few times, but I don't know him. But I was like, this guy's playing a character. There's no way this guy's real. And so I watched the Netflix special. I'm a fan, but not a huge fan. I'm watching it, and he literally in the first 5-10 minutes, he goes, "It's all a construction."
That's brave.
You want to talk about having some cojones, right? He has every reason in the world to keep up the illusion. But he literally is like, he dissembles it. He spends the whole show destroying the myth of Bruce Springsteen. It's quite interesting. So again, we're talking about like the tension between mainstream avant-garde, these types of things, public and private. There's a rare window into somebody who's been at the highest levels of media. He wrote a book with Obama, for God's sake, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He is establishment. He has complete establishment. Yet he's still willing to pull down the mask and reveal, hey, it's all a construct. Buy it if you want. There's something sort of really interesting about that, because that's a very rare window. It's one thing, like I saw, God, what was her name? Back in the day, you might remember or know some of these names that were the performance artists from the 80s. Karen Finley.
Yeah, of course.
I saw Karen Finley once it was in Chicago in a glass box all smeared with chocolate. I'm like 18 years old, right? And I'm like walking through this fucking club, and it's like, why does a woman need to smear herself with chocolate in a glass box naked? I thought it was so stupid, right? Yeah. But now I realize how brilliant it was, because just the fact that I was willing to think that she was winning, right?
Yeah, she was challenging.
Yes, and I love the avant-garde arts. I love those probative and shocking things. It's just at some point I had to realize that's just not who I am. I'm not that guy. I like ABBA. You know what I mean? Like
Me too.
I'm cool to be ABBA. You're right. That's what I'm saying.
And, God.
Honestly, what did people call it? Your guilty pleasure album. Everybody, like, you know what I mean? Like,
my wife would literally
I popped when I met Britney Spears. It wasn't like I was like, oh, Britney Spears. I was like, oh my God, it's Britney Spears. You know, it's
Hell
like,
yeah.
Hell yeah. Zeitgeist, right?
Yeah,
by the way,
yeah.
It was 19-year-old Britney at the height of Britney. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, it's like a living avatar. There it is.
Yeah.
There's the Britney Spears. God bless her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
my
cool.
wife's gonna freak out when I tell her how much you love ABBA. Michelle. Billy loves ABBA. That's her like favorite group in the entire world.
Oh hell yeah, as it should be.
You guys watched the ABBA movie?
Yeah, we watched that.
Where they have the matching ABBA jumpsuits.
Yeah, ABBA is amazing. Like it's almost like music as design or something. Like it's just designed to make you feel good.
Have you been to the ABBA museum?
No, I haven't.
Stockholm.
All right, when I'm there, I'm
Amazing.
going.
They have all the costumes. I'll tell you, highly recommended.
Boyd Rice is way into ABBA too. He's always talking
Oh, yeah.
about them. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like it's like saying I don't like candy, right? Like ABBA is like really great candy. It's like great confection.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what I'm trying to say, and again, I'm not trying to perform for an audience that I assume is edgier than I am. What I'm trying to say is, I think most of us are sophisticated at this point in life that we can kind of rotate between, you know, Karen Finley in a box, you know, Velvet Underground at 4 a.m., in some form of intoxication, and oh my God, the ABBA movie's on. This is so cool. Like, I think we're okay with that at this point. I don't think we need to fall into these like let's call it cultural ghettos where we have to defend our zone.
No, definitely not. I think greatness is actually, people say it's intangible. I think it's actually tangible, and you know it when you see it, and it can happen in the scourges of the underground, and it can happen at the absolute peak of the culture, and like an attuned and open mind learns to recognize it where it exists. And I've honestly, like, I've never, even at like my early 20s when I was like going to noise shows and trying to like make conceptual art and shit, I still never stopped loving the stuff that I loved as a kid that, you know, got me into everything, because like it's the journey. The journey is what matters. Everything that you put in shapes the sensibilities. And I actually have like a real distaste for people that revere one aspect of the culture over the others, or think because of anything other than greatness that it's better because it has this value system or whatever. That to me is just like pretentious, that not pretentiousness but arrogance, and I'm not into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's humans are attracted to control, right? And one form of psychological control is like, I was in a band with a guy, and you would say, "Oh man, have you heard the third album by Thin Lizzy? Such a great album." And the guy go, "Yeah,
Amazing.
but have you heard the demos?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no, I haven't heard the demos, but I'm sure that, like, it was always like there was always this like a one up thing, you know?
Yeah, of course.
Or the bassist around that time made a solo album. It's amazing. Like, it's like, okay, but I just was talking about their third album. It's like this weird, and I got a lot of that in the 90s, kind of like, oh, you're in the pop rock band. You guys, like, Bob Mould of Husker Du. He later apologized for it nicely, but he called us the grunge monkeys.
Fuck that.
No, that sounds like a compliment to me. That sounds like a great thing to be, if true.
So I took
which
it
I
as
don't
a
think it is.
But I understand that he was trying to diss us. And again,
Right.
to his credit, he later apologized, because we were obviously a little bit better than an artificial construct. We actually were an organic. A lot of people accused us of being a construct that I put together. And they point to some interview I did in like 1989 where I talked about the visual aesthetic of the band being kind of unique, as some sort of early tell indication that I'd put together the band as a construct. I just put together a band of people that were interested in what I was doing.
Yeah. But also rock and roll is a multimedia format. That's another thing that was lost during especially during the slacker era, but like in the way things were marketed. Like, you know, if there's any kind of like bands I really dislike, it's like Arcade Fire, that kind of vibe, like mid-level arena indie rock bands. But like rock and roll, I think of a sound and I think of an aesthetic. Like, nobody can deny that, like, all right, I'm sorry, if you're a Lou Reed fan, yeah, you love his songs, but you also probably think he looks pretty fucking cool singing them, you know? Like, you know, he had like an immaculate look. So, and you always have and I would not say that that is anything to your discredit. Like, the Smashing Pumpkins always had amazing aesthetics. They did, like the videos, the actual look of the band, the art direction. God, my wife actually, she's a arts publicist. I forget who's doing your art direction now.
Oh, Liz Hirsch is the current person
Yeah.
I'm working.
Michelle just like handled uh an auction, and a couple of her photographs were being auctioned off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, just talk about that for a little bit, like your interest in visual aesthetics, and if that did shape your idea of the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's hard because everything seems, when I look back now, if we're talking about the beginning of it, seems very quaint, right? Because now that we live in the Instagram era, like all that stuff is so weaponized.
Yeah.
If I knew how much it was going to be weaponized, I would have done more of it.
Does
it make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Like I thought I was being edgy and kind of a little bit different, but I didn't realize it was a business model. I just kind of, because for everything that I could point to that people still like in terms of iconography, I was always had somebody in my ear tell me it was a bad idea. So it wasn't like I was thinking like, oh, this is going to work and the kids are going to love this. You know what I mean? I always had somebody going, bad idea, bad idea, bad idea. So I didn't realize that sort of, there were templates that we looked at, like Bowie's changing every album was something that was an influence on us, or the Beatles sort of quick run through different aesthetics, or even Bob Dylan singing in different voices every year. It was kind of like, well, they must be onto something. There must be some kind of, let's call it changing costumes. But we were continually, and still to this day, are punished for that. It's seen as a weakness of the band, not a strength, which is really weird because in many ways, the band's never been bigger. And what people point at is this sort of the panoply of things that the band represents. In essence, the band not having a center is a strength in 21st century social media architecture, but that was always used against us. So I'd like to sit here and claim some sort of prescient genius, but I think it was just I would get bored with something and move on to something else. And then depending on what I could, how many Taschen books I could afford or whatever, I would just kind of flip into another set of aesthetics.
Yeah. Just finishing up here, because I know we're going a little long. You've always had this is just like shared interest things, but you've always been into metal music, which I'm also into, but I could always like hear like the Pumpkins in contradiction almost to other bands of the 90s. I think really kind of like and still does embraces like the power of the rock out. Was that like a conscious thing where you were like trying? I mean, I know Sabbath is huge for you. I know Judas Priest is huge for you. Does that still something that like informs how you play guitar, how the band functions? Whatever.
Yeah, it's more cerebral these days, but starting at the beginning of it, I was really into metal as a kid, and I found, like a lot of people do in metal, I found some sense of community. Like I went to see Metallica the week Ride the Lightning came out, and I talked to Lars Ulrich on his podcast about like what that was actually like to be there at the moment that the entire crowd realized Metallica was a one-of-a-kind band.
Yeah.
Making a one-of-a-kind album that would forever change the genre, right?
Yeah.
I was there the week it came out. I mean, you want to talk about goose flesh kind of moments. Like
That's amazing.
I experienced it, right? So I believe in the power of that. Let's call it. Like I saw Slayer twice on their they're going to break up tour, and I think five shows from their last show, I saw them in Romania. It was fucking unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, you want to talk about. Like it was like a precision army or something. It was so wickedly fast and brutal and amazing and one of a kind. And I got to go see Tom after the show and talk to him, and just it's so cool because he's just like the most peaceful warrior kind of dude, but he makes this incredibly fucking violent music that brings up some sort of dark spirit that only Slayer, as a guy once said, Slayer makes Slayer music. You know what I mean? I love that about Slayer. So I was Pantera, whatever. I always embraced it. But to give it some context to your question and kind of wrap up this soliloquy, I had a band before the Pumpkins, and I tried to kind of glom some metallic elements onto UK kind of, 80s, whatever, alt music. And people were like, what the fuck are you doing? This is like the worst marriage of all time. I abandoned that. I did. I abandoned it. And then when the Pumpkins started, and before Jimmy Chamberlain, the drummer, joined the band, we were kind of doing kind of B-level Cure goth kind of wait stuff, right? Once I figured out Jimmy Chamberlain could really play the drums, I was like, oh, I'm going to try this again. I'm going to try to glom metal with like kind of UK, psych goth or whatever. And it worked. And within a year and a half, when we kind of figured out who we were, I mean, our growth was exponential. We went from a club act that was opening for other bands to Madison Square Garden in 5 years. I mean, it was like a rocket straight up.
Yeah.
But, and this is the end of this long answer. My real thing with it was, and imagine the scene, 89, we're nobodies, we're playing in a club. There's 100 people there. There's the ska guy, there's the punk guy, there's the hipster there. When we would play heavy music, they would recoil. Because contextually, they didn't have a way to frame it in their alt world. You had bands like Soundgarden and even Jane's Addiction, but they weren't playing it the way we were playing it. There was always a hint of, if you think of Soundgarden and Jane's, there was always a little, like a hint of irony with heaviness.
Right. Yeah.
There was always a sense of like, yeah, we're playing heavy, but it's not really who we are-ish. With us, we were like, we completely embraced it. We
Absolutely.
would play long solos. I was raised as a guitar hero. I would do shit like you weren't supposed to do. And people would literally write, they shouldn't be doing this. The more they said we shouldn't be doing it, the more we did it.
Yeah, that's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. In essence, I guess what I'm trying to say, and I could have just said this in one sentence, I love that people don't recognize it as having an authentic voice. And I love turning that on its head and making them sort of have to deal with that.
Absolutely.
That to me is my definition of counterculture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it noise rock in somebody's basement? No. But trust me, in 1989, when you're fucking nobody and you have nothing, you have no money, nobody gives a shit about you, and the hipster in the back is plugging his ears and giving you the thumbs down, I wasn't like, oh, this is bad, I got to figure out how to get this guy to like me. I was like, fuck this guy, I want to get this guy to hate me. And the more I sound like Priest, the more he hates me. You know what I'm saying? This is amazing. A good thing. This is a good thing. Like if I can see, I guess what I'm trying to get at, and it's something that I really love to point out. And I'll use the hipster class, and I know you're no particular fan of the hipster class, at least from what I get a sense of your writings.
No.
Right? The hipsters, the hipsterdom is based on the idea that they've assimilated all the information and they've decided what's valuable. So they'll wear the Mork and Mindy t-shirt, but they won't actually watch Mork and Mindy, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, that's hipsterism in a, the right mustache, right t-shirt is what I always say. If you can actually get under a hipster's skin, you have accomplished something because it's outside their frame of reference. They're so sure that you can't shock or offend them that they can't believe they're being shocked or offended. So the projection becomes, there must be something wrong with you, not with them. Something must be wrong with you.
Right.
That's why I've said for years, the band is the hipster killer, because we throw them into a cognitive dissonance because we grew up listening to the same fucking bands they grew up listening to. You know what I mean? And apply it to any generation, it doesn't matter. We grew up listening to this. We came from the same fucking clubs. We drove around in the same shitty van. We came up through the ranks like every other indie band. They cannot imagine why somebody would do all that and make the decisions that we made. That to me is avant-garde, because
that is,
that's, and I'm not saying it like I'm as avant-garde as Karen Finley in a box naked with chocolate. I recognize that's the true avant-garde, but I'm saying it is avant-garde to take a set of precepts and go, no, I'm going to make all the wrong decisions and I'm going to win. And you're never going to be able to get rid of me.
Hell yeah.
It drives them insane, which is why, and referencing what I was saying before, I saw when we were in a weaker position culturally, people were literally writing us out of the history of the 90s.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember like, Pitchfork's whole thing was kind of this like college nerd revisionism of, I mean, now they're like full-blown poptimists, like, new Beyonce album is like a master, 10 out of 10.
Ask yourself the question why Pitchfork is suddenly into all that stuff. Does it have anything to do with Condé Nast owning Pitchfork?
It just might. I would say it just might.
I'm gonna go way out on a limb here. I have been on conspiracy theory shows like Alex Jones. I'm gonna go way out on a limb. It's got something to do with their corporate overlord.
Actually, I might have to tell you this in private, but a friend of mine saw Ryan Schreiber at a party recently, and let's just say the man's entire life seems to be different than what it was when he started the website in Chicago. Nevertheless, I shouldn't like dog him in public over that, but like there was some stuff that they were talking about that was like inarguable. Like everybody knows like My Bloody Valentine's Loveless is like a phenomenal album. But then they would sneak stuff in like that no one remembers now. I remember they were like the Dismemberment Plan, some album from 98. They were like, this is the second best album of the 90s. What? Says who? Says like two guys in your fucking dorm room? Like, what are you talking about? All that kind of shit. One more question I have for you, and then if you want to ask a couple questions, go for it. But like, what's your favorite Scorpions album?
God, what is the name? It's the one I was listening to recently. God, for years it was the one with Dark Lady on it.
Yeah.
Virgin Killers.
Yes.
But now I'm into I think I'm into the one that's before it. It might be called Fly to the Rainbow.
Yeah, let me double check.
I'm hurting my Scorpions bona fides here, but
I've always loved Taken by Force.
That's it.
Fifth album. The album. Yeah. That one has some fucking amazing songs on it.
Yeah. Taken by Force is made. And listen, every time it's the same riff. Every time I go to Germany, every time I interview, and every journalist, and I kid you not, why do you like the Scorpions?
That's weird. Yeah,
because I've gone hard on the record of saying I love the Scorpions. They're one of the greatest bands of all time, and common German culture doesn't like the Scorpions.
Interesting.
They're considered kind of like, oh, the Scorpions, right? They kind of get that shrug thing.
Yeah.
So imagine mainstream journalists in Germany, they're like, explain to me why the Scorpions are great.
Yeah. No, I think there's something so interesting about that era of metal, because like Dieter Dierks, who was like a krautrock kind of producer, was like making
did he produce like albums. Neu and all that stuff?
Yep, he produced Neu. I think he did one of the Faust records. But he was doing Priest albums, he was doing Scorpions albums, and if you listen to it, it often has this sort of like motorique and deeply homosexual aesthetic. So like what's so genius about like Judas Priest, of course, is that like it basically normalized and mainstreamed like what looks like now like an obviously and aggressively homosexual aesthetic for like the masses of like tough white men. In a way, that's like the kind of thing that I'm like really obsessed with, when you can like sneak an aesthetic into sneak an idea or concept or an aesthetic into a place where it doesn't belong, or like it seems like it shouldn't belong.
Well, that's what I've said a few times through the years. It's like you have two ways to attack the castle, either from within or without. I made the choice years ago at some younger age to attack the castle from within. And you can judge me, and you should judge me on whether or not I did a good job of that. But when you assail me, a la Pitchfork, through the years for not attacking the castle from without, it's like saying you should have been a goat instead of a giraffe or something. It's like we declared ourselves early that we were a certain way, right?
Yeah.
That's why I love Priest. That's why I would bitch about them not being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, they basically built a genre that didn't exist.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And And literally even like the craziest fucking black metal records that come out today are still directly linked to what Priest did. Like
Right.
it's the genesis of everything. And in my opinion, you attacked from within with grace and aplomb and dignity, and we applaud you for it. Will, did you want to ask anything before we jump off?
I have two maybe sort of dumb questions, but if Billy will permit me, I'd like to ask them.
Please.
Okay. My first is just, do you happen to have like a singular like favorite album?
Not really. I think that's the only overall downside to my life, in that in order to, because like I said, I love systems. I spent so much time analyzing other musicians and their albums that I don't really listen to albums like I used to when I was a kid.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, it was like Meet the Beatles or something. That was the first album I ever bought.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Or I loved, I loved Unleashed in the East. I think that's one of the greatest live albums of all time.
Okay.
Stuff like that. There's still an innocence to my liking it. But as far as like a true aesthetic kind of answer, like, no, I don't really have that, because to me, I just get lost in the mirrors in there of like why they did what they did.
Okay. Completely understandable. And
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, my second question, since you brought it up earlier, I am sort of curious, what, and not to say that you shouldn't have had an attraction to these bands, because they're obviously phenomenal, but I'm just curious what your specific interests in bands like Depeche Mode or The Cure were, especially back in the day when you were forming the punk. It's like what the attraction was. In
Yeah.
Bajas, yeah.
Well, I dated somebody when I was in high school, when I was about 17 years old, and she was the first person that I ever met that listened to all those bands. Like, she had all the imports and she had all those things on cassette and would make me tapes and stuff. So, but she wasn't a hipster. She just was like a good music fan.
Okay.
And it was interesting because when I first heard those bands, I had no cultural context to understand what I was listening to. So my first reaction was like, oh, this is weird. But I didn't dislike it, but I didn't know how to like it.
Okay.
And so through her, I started to realize the brilliance of New Order or The Cure. And then when I fell into goth culture when I was 18 years old, and I started going to a goth club in Chicago, and I met all the kind of the OG goths back then, of which you can imagine in Chicago, there were like 30, you know what I mean? Then you get this deep dive thing that we all get when we meet those people. They're like, oh, you got to check out this album or this single or this B-side. And then I got enmeshed in the culture and realized how brilliant it was. And what was beautiful about it was because there was almost no cultural celebration around many of those artists' greatest work, it was completely a personal experience.
Okay.
There was no sharing it with other people. Now, there might be sharing it with the goth girl, but that was it.
Right.
I couldn't go I couldn't talk to the guy in the corner about Depeche Mode. He didn't even know who the hell I was talking about. So it felt very personal. And so I found that I had a real affinity for those bands. Because in my mind, at 18 years old, I thought Bauhaus was one of the greatest bands I've ever heard.
Oh, for sure.
I thought Joy Division was as important as the Beatles by the time I was 19 years old. Like, I'd
Oh,
figured
yeah.
all that out, but I figured it out on my own. I didn't read some local zine telling me how great Joy Division was. I just figured out, like, fuck, this is amazing. Like,
Right.
And so I always have that sort of, I guess, how it feels, I'm repeating the word for the third time, but it feels so personal to me, because I felt like I discovered, like, it's simple to feel, oh, I discovered Bauhaus and Depeche Mode and The Cure, but it felt like that.
Yeah.
It felt so singular. And it really was at the time. And it's nice to see that those artists have received their sort of posthumous recognition over time. I mean, The Cure was huge in LA, but in Chicago, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, that sense of discovery, I feel like it's something that's been another thing that's been sort of resigned to the dustbin, and something that even if I'm trying to avoid nostalgia, I feel a sense of mourning for, because there was nothing like it. I mean, I still
Yeah.
discover shit, but it's just by like my autistic burying myself in the internet. It doesn't have the same vibe as like hearing dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
like hearing that for the first time.
Yeah, I think the saddest thing, and maybe this is a good way to end it, is yes, I think the fans sort of miss out on that sense of discovery, like maybe we had. But I think the real tragedy is the feedback loop is too fast for the artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because the feedback loop is so fast, you don't get those kind of slower arcs where they figure it out, and you can see them figuring it out from like the Cure's first album to their second album to their third album to their fourth to their fifth. You don't get that anymore. It's like everything all the time. And I think that is the shame, the quick feedback, because young artists really do need to stumble through things to figure some things out. And if you get that instant kind of feedback, particularly negative, I mean, it cuts off avenues of exploration that set up great work that you will never hear because they're never going to go down that avenue.
Absolutely.
Plus the whole micro genre, like now you have like there's so many genres of metal, I can't even keep them straight anymore.
Oh,
like,
totally.
gothcore,
Depressive,
black,
suicidal black metal.
yeah. Sometimes I read your like the thing you put out, and you'll talk about some of this stuff, and you'll like name check genres, and I'm like, I haven't like Dark Frost, interplanetary metal core, and I'm like, what the
Well, I
fuck
get kind of creative with it. I make a lot of that
maybe that's
shit
you.
up. Yeah.
But I'm like, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
all right. I gotta go be a
hilarious.
parent again.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
Well, all right. Well, William Corgan, thank you so much for joining the show. You honor us with your presence and eternal
absolutely.
influence on the minds of people our age, older and younger. And thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you, gentlemen. Nice talking to you guys.
All
Nice
right,
talking to you
guys.
too, man.
Billy, talk to you soon.
Thank you, Adam.